Hi, everybody. Meteorologist Joe Chaffee on the Joe Chaffee Weather Show. It is Tuesday, the 27th of August, 2019. And, of course, attention's going to be focused front and center on Tropical Storm Dorian. I need to turn the light on. Hang on a second, folks. Here. Let's give it a moment here. Now, that's much better. Okay. So, we've got a few changes going on with respect to some additional warnings that went up for the Virgin Islands. They have tropical storm warnings there. We still have tropical storm warnings up for Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic. And the overall forecast logic pretty much remains the same going forward that we talked about yesterday. We have dry air issues with Dorian and the mid-level dry air. In fact, I have a sequence of maps. One of the HWRF model, which is on tropicaltidbits.com, has one of the choices you can look at is the relative humidity between 10 and 20,000 feet, the mid layers of the atmosphere, which is exactly where the dry air issues have been coming from at the mid levels, and that has kept Dorian from strengthening further. It's been kind of holding its own in here, but we'll watch the progress of the dry air and what is probably going to happen going forward, because it leads to some interesting changes and some possibilities down the road with regards to what Dorian is going to be doing. So I'm just going to square myself up here a little bit. Let's get the first window up on the board, and we will get this show on the road. So what I have here is the HWRF, the hurricane part of it, where they can, hang on one second, my computer is being evil here. Oh boy. Oh, good God. Sorry about that. Hang on. There's a lot of different programs here running at the same time, and it's been a little bit problematic. Now I can get this squared away. Okay, so let's start with that HWRF model. So I have this actually backtracked to Sunday morning. Now, the area in brown, if you look at the scale on the side, that is relative humidity. And the brown and the yellowish areas are all 40% or less. You get into those bluish green areas, and now you're starting to look at relative humidities at 75% or higher. Well, it's clearly obvious that you have an absolute ton, or had an absolute ton, of dry air completely surrounding what became Tropical Storm Dorian. Dorian had its own little environment there where it was that it was thriving in spite of the fact that you had all this super dry air around it. And that dry air has remained as we move through the day on Tuesday. You still have dry air around to the west. Now, I have this set for an hour from now, the forecast for this evening. And you'll notice, if I just back it up from 24 hours or so ago, the dry air is beginning to diminish, particularly to the north and to the northeast and even to the east. And then, if the HWRF is to be believed, it kind of loses the Dorian to some degree south of Puerto Rico. The feature there's an identifiable feature here, but it does weaken this, and that could be because the HWRF may be showing a much more aggressive upper air wind shear scenario. And then, of course, you have the interactions with the Dominican Republic and with Puerto Rico. But as we move north of there, as long as there's some kind of core that remains intact, you'll notice as we start to move it toward the end of the week, when it gets into the Bahamas, we're going into a much more moist environment here off the southeast coast of the United States. And the system responds to that by actually seeing pressures falling down into the high 980s on this particular model before it goes on land somewhere in along the east coast of Florida, about a little bit more than halfway up. Now, if you're watching if you're watching my channel for the first time, the regulars all know this. I'm really illustrating here what the overall conditions are going to be, and it's not a good idea to focus on what any one particular model does. And as far as the weather geeks are concerned, we also don't want to focus on models that give outlying solutions necessarily. It's not that you shouldn't be aware of those outlying solutions, but I want you to understand what is going on in the upper air in order to cause that particular solution. And I will get to that because I know a few of you in the pre-show chat have been talking about the legacy GFS, which is the old GFS model with a more northerly course. And I took a look at it, and I understand why it's doing it, and I see the major difference. But it's important that we understand the differences and then relate it to what's happening in the atmosphere. Is this a realistic possibility? Anyway, we'll come back to that. My point here is that assuming it survives as it moves across the Dominican Republic or Puerto Rico, or perhaps it threads the needle and goes somewhere in between, it is going to be going into toward the southwest Atlantic, up through the Bahamas and off Florida, where there is no dry air issue here. Okay, this is a very much a moisture-laden environment, and with respect to those strong upper air winds, this particular model, again, pretty aggressive here. The upper high that is being very supportive, we're looking at this as the wind shear levels from about 5,000 to 30,000 feet. The small arrows indicate the wind flow up at the highest level, up at around 25 to 30,000 feet. And there we have an upper high that is sitting over this tropical system. Tropical systems are most intense near the bottom, and they are shallower as you go higher. So you want to see that. You don't want stronger winds as you go higher up in the atmosphere. Tropical systems don't like that. Thunderstorms get ripped apart, cloud tops get blown away. Cold core systems, on the other hand, it's the reverse. They're more intense as you go up as opposed to down near the surface, relatively speaking. So here we have an upper high and the identifiable feature of Dorian eventually making its way through the Bahamas. Well, here it's still in the Caribbean, of course, and then now you kind of loses it there. There are some strong wind shear areas that are forecast by this model up in and around Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic, plus the mountainous terrain. But then as we head off toward Florida, we get into a light wind shear environment. And actually, the outflow here is pretty strong. So you have to wonder whether the models are sensing that there's a possibility that we could see some significant strengthening of this once it gets to the Bahamas and off of Florida. Something I think we're going to really need to pay attention to going forward. Here's the satellite loop tonight of Dorian. The outflow, as Hurricane Center men talked about, the cirrus outflow, which is pretty impressive. And I don't really see any evidence of any shear at the moment. We're not seeing cloud tops blowing away from west to east or from southwest to northeast. The system has a very symmetric look to it. So it has a lot of positives from the standpoint of, not emotional positives, but there are a lot of things that would point to the idea that this thing should strengthen. Were it not for that mid-level dry air, we would probably be seeing something stronger than what we have. We could have very well have would be seeing a minimal hurricane at this point, as opposed to sort of a mid-level tropical storm. We only have top winds here running at about 40 to 50 miles, about 50 miles an hour. Now here's the wide view across the Atlantic, and there are a couple of things I want to point out here. Of course, you can see where Dorian is. Lower center, just north of the coast of you see the coast of South America on the shot. It's just north in the Caribbean. You have Tropical Depression 6, still in about the same place that it was last night, off the North Carolina coast, southeast of Hatteras by a little over 300 miles. And we'll also be talking about that shortly. But take a look at on the far left, because you have a very interesting phenomena going on, and it's very evident here on today's loop. That hazy brownish area you see, that is all dust from the Sahara Desert that is blowing off of Africa out into the open waters of the Atlantic and moving westward. Now, the interesting thing is, to me, is that at the moment, that whole area is pretty much north of 20 degrees north. So if any waves come out far enough south, 15 degrees south or south of there, that dust would probably not be a factor. But going forward, it'll be interesting to see how big that plume is, because it's still coming off, even as far as you can see it before the sun sets, off the last frame, and extends about a third of the way across the Atlantic. Again, most of it is north of 20 degrees north and north of the Cabo Verde Islands. We got just a couple of weak waves along the intertropical convergence zone. There's an upper low that's northeast of Dorian out in the Atlantic. And between that and then the depression along the east coast, you are seeing a weakening of the upper ridge that is allowing Dorian to turn more toward the north. And that's why we're getting that poleward motion. Also, notice east of the convection that goes into the depression, there actually is another upper low there that is spinning away. So those factors are pulling Dorian poleward, and of course this increases the threat to Puerto Rico and to the Virgin Islands. So let's take a look at the Hurricane Center's forecast. And I'm going to get rid of a couple of loops here so I can have better control of my computer. So this was from the 5 o'clock advisory from the National Hurricane Center, where we have Dorian at 15.3 and 62.5 west. So that is now on the east side of the southern Leeward Islands by about 40 or 50 miles. And its forecast, the way they have it tracking, they keep it as a tropical storm, which I think probably makes sense given that we haven't really seen any strengthening of it, again, because of that dry mid-level, the dry mid-levels. So keeping it as a tropical storm, I think, makes sense. Crossing perhaps western Puerto Rico or the eastern part of the Dominican Republic sometime from Wednesday evening into Thursday morning. Now, bear in mind that we are talking about a storm that is still, in terms of size, in terms of the geography it covers, it's still not that big. Gales only extend out about 40 to at most 50 miles from the center, and less in some of the in the northern quadrants, and less in some of the southern quadrants. So you're going to have to see the storm track relatively close. It can go over the western part of Puerto Rico, and you may not see much wind impact in the eastern part of Puerto Rico. The mountains, of course, are going to distort all this. I'm just, I'm just sort of speaking in theory here, but heavy rain I think could be a big deal on these islands. 6 to 10 inches wouldn't be a big shocker, and then taking it north and then bending it back to the west-northwest through the forecast period into just kind of going parallel to the Bahamas and then swinging westward by Sunday afternoon, landfalling somewhere in the state of Florida. And you can see the way they have the, quote, cone of uncertainty fairly wide down into the Keys and as far north as about Savannah on the northernmost side. I have to tell you, by the way, that the Hurricane Center forecast track errors have really dwindled down over the last couple of years. And last year, I believe the error in the 48-hour or less time frame was only about 20 miles, which is really, that's a very, very good forecast error score to have. So their forecasts over the years have improved considerably from the standpoint of track. As far as strength is concerned, that's a much tougher nut to crack. And these storms, from the strengthening angle, have done some really strange things over the years. You think it's going to do one thing and then it does something else, but they're working on it. In the meantime, we'll see what they do to this once we get north of. To me, I've been saying since yesterday, the key is to wait to see what happens once we get this system north of Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic. Just exactly what are we going to be dealing with? What kind of intensity are we going to have? Is it going to get ripped apart to a significant degree where it doesn't make a comeback, or does it perhaps come through as a stronger system than forecast, which maybe opens the door to some possibilities that we could be dealing with something a bit more significant when it runs through the Bahamas and towards Florida. All of that is stuff that we're going to have to determine going forward. Going to jump over to the GFS upper air, if it lets me. Actually, no, we're going to jump to the Europeans upper air. And by the way, those of you on the Patreon, my Patreon weather platform, give a check. I did do a weather in 10 today for for Patreon members only, and go ahead and take a look at it because it goes into depth what I'm about to do here. But watching this upper air is interesting on the European. Taking a look now, this is at Friday, and I think the best thing to do here is I'm going to bring the paint box up so we can do a little drawing, and I can give you a better perspective. Instead of just verbally describing it, you'll be able to see what I'm talking about here. But once the storm passes out north of the islands, the question is, again, the track to the west, northwest, or northwest, and the Hurricane Center is pointing out, and I think rightfully so, that the key to Dorian's ultimate track is going to be this upper high that is going to be building across the western Atlantic into the southeastern part of the United States. How strong that upper high gets is really going to determine the ultimate outcome here. And you can see it here by Friday morning. It's to the northeast of the storm. You've got an upper high basically sitting over Bermuda. There's another upper high back in Texas, New Mexico, and that is actually going to be building eastward. The upper high in the Atlantic is going to be building westward. And what that does is expanding higher pressures to the northeast, north, and northwest of the storm pretty much puts a brick wall on up where the storm is going to have to ride along it. The flow from the Atlantic is going to be southeast to northwest, and Dorian is going to respond to that by tracking on a northwest, or then eventually, as the ridge gets strong enough, into to a west-northwest course. And this is why it doesn't recurve here, because this upper high is going to be too strong. From northern Kentucky to Virginia and offshore, you have the base of the westerly winds in the upper atmosphere. And as long as that is the case, in general, it would be very hard, even if this ridge were not going to build. Let's say that if that ridge were not going to build westward from this point, then what you would have, and again, also assuming that not much changes, say from Friday up until the rest of the weekend, the upper pattern looks just like this. Well, you've got a weakness here off the Florida coast and off the southeast coast of the United States, and Dorian would probably respond to that weakness by turning northward and then eventually turning northeastward, maybe coming very close to the Carolinas, if this were an upper high that wasn't going to be building, just remaining the same. And of course, assuming that the westerly winds from Kentucky to Virginia out into the Atlantic would remain the same, Dorian would go out to sea. But let's look at what the European does here between Saturday and Sunday, and it actually builds that upper high. I'll just back it up again, and you can watch it build from east to west. We're looking at about the 18,000 foot level here. And going into Saturday morning, back to the paint box, will show you here that you've got the upper high very strong, built all the way back to Arkansas, into Mississippi, and then extending all the way back out into the Atlantic to the east of Bermuda. This is all one big upper high, and there's your wall as I described here, the southern end of that. You still have the upper high out to the west. They're almost joined, and Dorian would just follow right along and continue to move on a west-northwest course. Now, the European model is very, very strong with this ridge idea. Going into Sunday, in fact, and I'll show you the change. We'll now go back to the, we're going to go to the Sunday map here. So let me clear this up and put up the Sunday upper air. So now this is Sunday morning. The feature that represents Dorian is at this point right on the coast of Florida. Here's your upper high. It's centered just off the Carolina coast somewhere, so something like this. And it's got Dorian pinched away there, and you can see that last line there that goes down into Kentucky, down into New Jersey. There's your southern end of your westerly. So Dorian still responding to this upper high. Here's the look without the drawing on it. Just put it back up again. So I'm going to take this off, and I'm going to bring up now the GFS, the new GFS for Sunday. And this is where this is an important difference that shows up on today's GFS run, the late afternoon GFS run, because of the implications of this. I'm not saying I believe it, but the difference between the GFS and the European on this run, and it was not the case on the prior run. The in-between run, sometimes you have to be a little bit careful in how you use them. But the GFS on this run is saying that the upper ridge, that upper high, is nowhere near as strong as what the European had. Remember, for Sunday morning, the European had the upper high pretty much enveloped around the Dorian. The GFS says no. The GFS says that ridge is much weaker. And the Hurricane Center does acknowledge on their discussion tonight the fact that the strength of this upper high is really going to be key in terms of the where the forecast is. So this is the reason why the models are doing different things tonight. The GFS and the European and the Canadian were very consistent on the run from mid-morning, the 12Z run, the late afternoon mid-cycle run on the GFS, and the old GFS, which you can still see on Tropical Tidbits, they're suddenly arguing that no, that ridge is not going to be strong enough to continually deflect this thing along to the west-northwest. I will tell you that right now that the pattern to me suggests that you want to favor the idea of the ridge being stronger here. So I would be very cautious about suddenly jumping on the idea that this one run of the GFS is the one to pay attention to. At least, right off of one run, you're just not going to do that. And this is where the GFS brings it inland, straddling the north coast of Florida, and then bringing it inland somewhere near Georgia, and then taking it out to the east. Remember, those westerlies, those upper air westerly winds are still not that far away. And when we go to the wider view of the jet, look at the flow early next week in the east. So here's the GFS, the new GFS with that ridge not nearly as strong, but you've got westerly winds or west-northwest winds actually from South Dakota to Illinois to Kentucky to West Virginia to Virginia, and that flow only winds up getting stronger because you have this short wave, you have this troughing and upper low in southeastern Canada that's moving through during the middle part of next week. So it still kicks it out to the east. I think no matter how you slice it, as far as the anything turning up the coast and coming straight northward, I really don't think that's going to happen. I do believe that from what I've been seeing the last couple of days, it's hard to argue with the fact that the ridge is going to be dominant here into the early part of next week to steer this as far west as it can. The European, by the way, takes it into the Gulf of Mexico and northwestward from there. That's how strong the ridge is on the European. And our job the next couple of days is to watch the progress of that ridge to see if the European is correct or if it's overdone. Once upon a time, when the European model would show a strong upper air ridge, you kind of respected that. But these days, the European has been suspect to a large degree. It likes to have a more left-leaning track most of the time. So, it has a bias that way. On the other hand, the GFS has the bias the other way, where it wants to weaken the ridge off the southeast coast way too fast. Meanwhile, back off the southeast coast, speaking of which, we still have Tropical Depression 6. And I've noticed in the two things. During this afternoon, the low-level center, and it shows up so well on this loop, the low-level center became completely exposed. But late this afternoon and this evening, it appears that we've seen a blow-up of thunderstorms on the southeast side of that center. Now, whether it continues overnight remains to be seen. This actually happened earlier today, where the thunderstorms developed near the center, only to see them all pull away as that low-level center moved a little bit to the northwest and becoming completely exposed. Now we're seeing another blow-up of storms again. Look, the bottom line is, whether it develops or not, this is going away, and it's going northeastward, and it's not going to have any impact on any land areas other than to kick up the surf, perhaps, for later Wednesday and for Thursday along the Delaware, New Jersey, Long Island coastline, southern New England, where there'll be, a little bit of rough surf and some rip tides. So if you are beach bound Thursday and Friday, which you might very well be because our weather's going to be so nice here, you might consider that because you want to swim safely, of course. But you can see the Hurricane Center's track with Tropical Depression 6 is to turn it north and northeastward, and then it just goes into the Atlantic graveyard. It might get energized a bit by the upper trough that's swinging through the eastern part of the United States, but other than that, I think it really is of minimal concern. Now, we do have a cold front that's approaching on Wednesday, and you see it here by Wednesday evening, running from upstate New York down into the Carolinas. There's a high in western Tennessee. You see the low reflecting the tropical depression, lifting up to the northeast. The front basically is the punter. Now, I think for the storms tomorrow, I don't see a severe weather threat here. There will probably be some scattered general downpours and a couple of thunderstorms in the mix, but I don't see anything with regards to severe weather. Then our high builds in. Now, this is going to be a warm high, but it's going to be a dry one. So for the northeast and maybe down I'll look at the dew points, but maybe down to southern Virginia, to southern Pennsylvania and into southern New Jersey, the humidity levels will be reasonable. They'll start to go up as you go further south, but you'll have 2 warm days, Thursday and Friday, in case you expanded your Labor Day holiday weekend plans to 5 days instead of 2. Thursday and Friday are going to be 2 very nice beach days. And then here we go for Friday. There's another weak front that's coming through. And then we've got another big high that's going to be moving through upstate New York and into New England. Very similar to what we had on last weekend. The only difference this time around is that we don't have a feature going up out of the Atlantic and intensifying over Nova Scotia that reinforced the dry air for Monday, yesterday, in the Northeast. Instead, the high is going to move out, and it keeps on moving, so that by the time, after a beautiful day on Saturday of sunshine, low humidity, and cool temperatures from, say, Northeast Virginia to southern New England, the high goes out and the humidity starts to go up as early as Sunday, and there even is a peppering of some showers here with a little upper air disturbance Sunday night into Monday before we go to a warm, humid Labor Day with the risk for some scattered showers and storms. And meanwhile, you can see the Dorian on this view skimming the Bahamas, bouncing off the northeast Florida coast and then turning northeast and then sharply turning eastward from there. Again, this run really weakened the ridge. I'll show you the prior run, because the prior run was much more along the ideas of what the European and the Canadian model had. The prior run, upper air, much stronger ridge off the southeast coast. Not that different from the European. It's a little weaker than the European, but it's still pretty strong. And the flow in the north, there's not as much of a little shortwave trough there from the Great Lakes down into Kentucky that kind of pokes a hole and creates the weakness. Perhaps the mid-cycle run, the new run we just got, is a little deeper. It is a little bit deeper with that particular shortwave. So it's for that reason that it weakens the ridge as much as it does. Right now, I'm not saying it's impossible, but I would sort of lean against it, given the overall pattern. And speaking of the overall pattern going forward, let's run the upper air on the North America view. Still have, by the way, higher pressures across the North Atlantic up into Greenland for the rest of the week. You see the feature there of Dorian. You've got the upper low in Labrador. It pulls out. A new trough comes in. It pulls out. New trough swings in. Now we're at day 11, so we're at September 7th and 8th. New trough swings in, pulls out. You still have the same story, folks, of this northern jet being flexing back and forth. And now, of course, as we go into the month of September, you are going to start to see the southern end of the jet stream go further and further south, and which means that some of these air masses coming down with these highs will probably start to get progressively cooler with time. So if you're a fan of autumn weather, you're going to want this pattern to hold like this, so that as we go through the month, you start to get some really solid shots of cool, dry air. And one of the things I would also point out, with the troughing in the east being as persistent as it is, in the longer term, you want to be careful, because if you get a trough that drops in the wrong way, that's when you could wind up with something turning up the coast. I just don't think you're going to see it happen this time around. WPC, the Weather Prediction Center, obviously picking up on the impacts of Dorian, showing virtually the entire state of Florida getting in a 5 to 7 inch rain band, and even has that 7 to 9, I think that is. Actually, that's the 10 inch rain band up from Tampa, St. Pete, northward and northeastward, straddling the immediate coast there on the Florida bend, and you've got heavy rains also extending up just off the of coastal Georgia and South Carolina, with the 3-inch plus rains pushing up to coastal South Carolina and into southeastern North Carolina. So this is all their view here of the impacts of Dorian. And with the front that we're seeing here for tomorrow, you've got the WPC folks showing the blues You start with the blues, or 3/4 of an inch to an inch and a half of rain, and a couple of pockets of 2-inch plus in the Catskills, and on up a little bit further north and east of there, and also in parts of coastal eastern New England. Now, much of this is, I think, going to be front-end loaded because of what's going on in the east for tomorrow. I don't think that front is going to be a huge producer in terms of rainfall, but we're not talking about thunderstorms that are going to produce 3 to 4 inch flash flooding here. This is a fast-moving front. We don't have a whole lot of we don't have a tropical environment here in this time around. The dew points are going to climb, but they're not going to get into the saturated low and mid 70s. Still seeing some big rains out in the plain states, with some strong thunderstorm activity that's been persistent there for a while. Here's the Storm Prediction Center's picture for tonight as far as severe weather is concerned. And the two disclaimers that I always bring up, of course, with regards to severe weather, weather.gov. Go to your local National Weather Service office, particularly if you're watching this on a replay. And with respect to going forward with Dorian or any other tropical storm or hurricane, you want to make sure you consult your local government officials regarding any kind of decisions you might have to make, or the National Hurricane Center or your local National Weather Service office. I can't really help you with those kinds of things when they become an issue. That's something I don't know your local area as well as you do, and the folks at home know it far better than I ever could tell you. So you want to go to your local officials and your local National Weather Service forecast office or the National Hurricane Center for any information. And tonight's satellite loop of the U.S., and I want to go back also. I'm going to go back. There's one thing I do want to show you on the GFS. I just remembered. But here's the look at what's going on tonight on the satellite. You see the swirl of Tropical Depression 6 offshore. A lot of clouds here in the east. You also can see that upper trough that's dropping down into the northern plains and western lakes that's forcing this cold front through. And got a lot of moisture back over through Texas and on up into parts of West Texas and North Texas and Oklahoma, which we're going to see some rains out of this when it pushes up a little bit further to the north and east. And this satellite loop is not in far enough out so that you can see Dorian, but we saw that before. And of course, you can see how bone dry it is just to the west of the stuff going on in the plains. It's absolutely bone dry from the Rockies all the way out to the west coast. Okay, let me just bring the GFS back because I got one other thing I wanted to show you. And then I will join you all on the chat board. Okay, whoops, I lost it. So, hang on. I'm going to set it up. Okay. Get ready. All right. Okay, snow lovers. You ready? The GFS total snowfall over the next 10 days. It's starting to appear. It may be in the Arctic regions. It may be in Greenland. It may be in the far northern reaches of Canada and Labrador. But you are seeing the beginnings of snow appearing on the GFS snowfall forecast maps. Okay? So I gave those of you who have been already asking me about the winter, I've given you a little something to salivate over. Snow lovers are never satisfied. It could snow every day. Actually, they typically, for them, if it doesn't snow every day from November 1st to April 30th, the winter was an absolute disaster. It was a waste of a winter. I don't know where it snows every waking day from November 1st to April 30th, but the snow lovers, you seem to think that there is such a place. I don't know of one. Lisa Nieves, thank you for hitting Super Chat tonight. Really appreciate it. By the way, thank you, and we have a nice crowd that's on tonight too. That's always good to see. And Christopher, thanks for earlier hitting super chat as well. Okay, seeing you guys are all chit chatting away. Yes, Tim Pendleton. When fall is coming when the snow map appears, no doubt about it. And it's only the end of August, by the way. Javon Perry, your thunderstorm season is winding down to a precious few days, and pretty soon you'll have to wait a whole 7 or 8 months before the next round. Let's see. Frank Russ, by the way, I don't know if you caught it yesterday. I did send you a message on Patreon. You're our newest member there. Thanks for joining, and enjoy it, and feel free to message me at any time. Peter Bicker, I wouldn't be surprised if Dorian is a strong hurricane by the time it hits Florida. Well, I'll tell you, Peter, certainly, the environment that's going to be off the Florida coast and in the Bahamas is going to be a lot more moist than what's there now, and the upper air winds conditions should be favorable for some strengthening. The question in my mind is, what are you going to have when it gets through Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic? I think once we see what comes out the other side, that will probably set the stage for what we'll be dealing with down the road. And again, the other thing to remember is we're going to be focusing on how strong that upper high builds off the southeast coast of the United States. How far west does it extend, and is it going to be strong enough to move it along and keep it on a west-northwest track? MZ Safalorite. Do I post a copy of your live video chat so that I can rewatch this? Yes, it's on my YouTube channel. The live streams go in the video library, and they are there. So just pull up my YouTube channel, Joe Chaffee, and the latest videos should be up there. The 18Z HWRF is looking even stronger with Dorian by Saturday morning than the 12Z did. The only thing is, Peter, I would be real careful with the HWRF because it really does tend to overdo a lot of the time. So I don't know. I wouldn't suddenly use that as my gospel as far as the forecast is concerned. I certainly think it's possible that we could wind up with a stronger system than it is being forecast by some of the other models. But we've of course gone over the issues. We've spoken about the issues rather than go over it again. But I just would be a little careful with that HWRF model. It loves to make Category 3, 4, and 5 hurricanes a lot. And even some of the smaller systems that we've seen this year, it's gone overboard. So I would actually be curious about the fact that if in terms of strength, with because the models have not been spinning up everything. Usually the Canadian is especially guilty of this, but perhaps with upgrades that they may have done, and certainly with the GFS upgrade, perhaps they've been able to correct for those overzealous model moments when they make Category 5 hurricanes out of nothing. Scrolling up on the board, it's just trying to see if any of you have left any questions. By the way, for those of you who are watching and are a little bit shy, feel free to join in on the chat. You just have to use your Gmail account to get on YouTube and subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is absolutely free. And you can jump in on the chat board, which is an always very active and lively chat on just about every night. If the track were to happen, as Javon Perry asked, that with Dorian, or could it be to Dorian what it could be left of it go to the Gulf and re-strengthen again? Well, that's what the European kind of showed today, Javon. Again, strength of the ridge. It really is going to be boiled down to the building upper high. That's really what it's going to ultimately determine where we're going to be going with this in the in the longer term. There doesn't seem to be anything else out there that's going to produce any kind of weakness in the process of the ridge building. So we'll just wait. We'll wait and watch over the next couple of days and see what happens. Just running back up a little bit further up the chat. Usually by the time we get to a point where I'm 45 minutes into a live stream, you guys have already had this long conversation, and I'm trying to and I'm sort of reading all of this backwards. Let's see. I'm seeing, all right, everybody's saying hello to everybody else, which is good. Let me just come back down to the bottom. The European, I just saw something here. Someone just pointed to something about the European model, and I hit the button and it disappeared. My apologies to whoever did that. You saw Christmas items on sale in the Howard saw Christmas items on sale in the Dollar General. Not a shocker. Not a shocker. Right, so usually by the end of August, Costco has the Christmas stuff already out there. Lauren Kelly, what are the chances of me having to cancel Orlando plans supposed to leave this Friday and return on the 4th? Well, look, if we wind up with a tropical system that comes into Florida and goes across, you're definitely going to get into some rain. And quite a bit of rain in Orlando. If you're flying in on Friday, you're supposed to leave Friday for Orlando. I assume, you're driving and then you're coming back on the... Wait. What are the chances of me having to cancel Orlando plans? Supposed to leave this Friday, return the 4th of September. So you're coming back to New York City on the 4th of September. Okay. Your return trip on the 4th is fine. If you're going Friday and you're going to be there for the Labor Day weekend, obviously you're going to have to keep in touch with the weather situation down there. Maybe by tomorrow's Wednesday, I think we should have a fair idea of what it's, where we're going with this for Saturday into Sunday. Right now, I certainly would lean to the idea that eventually this is going to run into Florida, but I want to see what happens after it deals with Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic. If it gets torn apart, again, you might wind up with something far less. If it comes through there with a solid core, then you may be dealing with something stronger as it approaches Florida. So I would say come back tomorrow with that question, and we'll certainly give it another look. By watching the current McDoom, watching the current mission, both NOAA P3 and USA FRWC 130. No, but you know what? While we're here, let me see if they sent back some recon reports from Dorian. The last reconnaissance aircraft report that's on the Hurricane Center site right now is from earlier this afternoon, when they were there with 1,008 pressure. Let's just see if they're sending observations back. Okay, they are sending observations back right now, but they haven't gotten to having sent the full vortex data report. And I'm just going to check to see if the 8 p.m. advisory is out, which it is not yet, but it will be out in a couple of minutes. So let me come back to the chat here, and we'll buy a little bit more time because I am going to have to go soon here. Why are they already giving a state of emergency when it's only a tropical storm? Danville Boost. Look, that's a political question, really, and above my pay grade. The Florida, Louisiana, particularly because of the experiences of recent years. Last year with Hurricane Michael, they're being preemptive, and quite honestly, I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea to be preemptive. Look, if you live down there, if you lived in that area, you know what the drill is. And some people love to complain, okay? Not you, I'm just saying in general. Some people love to complain when you've got folks whose job it is to kind of organize this stuff in emergency management or trying to do the right thing, and perhaps they are being a bit overprotective. We could put it in those terms. But look, those same people that would complain that a state of emergency was put up too late are going to also complain when a state of emergency is put up for too soon, or perhaps that it wasn't justified. To which I usually say that I'm sorry you didn't get the tragedy you were hoping for. I know it's horribly inconvenient if you're told to evacuate and leave your home, but it's good to be able to go back to still have your life, thankfully, to go back to whatever you have. Whatever you lose, you can replace. You can't replace yourself. So look, I'm not going to second guess what the states do and what local politicians do with regards to states of emergency when it comes to tropical storms and hurricanes, because what if we're wind up here? There's a lot of variability here, and there's a lot of uncertainty at this point. So what if it suddenly becomes evident that along about Friday that we've got a Category 2 hurricane heading for the coast or something stronger? Then you've run out of valuable time that you need to do the things that you need to do in order to protect life and secure property. So they're being preemptive. You can't blame folks. You can't blame the folks in Florida and in the Gulf states, particularly for the experiences they've had over the last 5-10 years or more, for being a little bit preemptive. And Ms. Cephalarite, I'm sorry, 4 syllables. I'd rather be overprepared than caught flat-footed, and that makes total sense. Now, throwing salt down on roadways when the low temperatures at night are going to be in the 40s, all right, that's ridiculous. And those of you who live in New Jersey, Long Island, New York City, and the Hudson Valley understand what I mean by that, because of last November's early snowstorm that caught the area's snow removal folks completely flat-footed, because they don't budget for snow removal in November. So naturally they don't, and they can't authorize overtime. So when 3 inches of snow fell during the evening rush hour, it became an absolute nightmare. And we spent all of last winter having states of emergencies being called and roads being salted in situations where it was not in my view, was not necessary. And the result of that, by the way, is if you live up here and you know that I speak the truth on this, the roads here are about as awful as I have ever seen them. The salt just has created potholes and have just ripped up roads, and they haven't been able to fix them. So now we're going into the fall and winter. If they haven't fixed them by now, they're not going to be able to, because the winter months are going to be here. So anyhow, there's the snow angle for the snow lovers. Thank you, Gerard Stapleton. Trying my best. Keep up the good work. Thank you so much. Very kind from St. Martin with the Hurricane Irma. Yes, I do remember it well. One of the kind of eerie moments for me, by the way, Gerard, you just reminded me, was that during that, after Irma, I did get someone, I believe, if I remember correctly, from the island of St. Thomas, and who told me that they were lucky enough to have an internet signal, and I was their only connection. My weather was their only weather connection that they had to the outside world. So that was that was a very eerie statement in the way it's kind of scary when you think about it, that you're in a lot of those islands all the communication was completely cut off. If you were lucky enough to get to have a signal on your phone, and this person expressed that, and I was the only way they would find out with regards to weather. And of course, there was Hurricane Jose, which was a Category 5 hurricane that was headed after Irma. You had Irma, Jose, and Jose was 4 days, actually about 2 or 3 days behind. No clue that it was heading toward them, and thankfully it made a turn to the northwest and away from those islands, and didn't hit them, because then it would have been the 1-2-3 punch of Irma, Jose, and Maria. So anyhow, all right, we're coming up on 8 o'clock Eastern time. Thanks again for everybody for being here. Really appreciate it. Lisa Nieves, thank you for hitting Super Chat tonight. Same also to Christopher. Thank you for hitting Super Chat tonight. I get myself a cigar for the drive home. I'm a happy camper. Okay, here's how it's going to go for tomorrow. Weather in 5 tomorrow morning, so we'll have an update on what's going on. And we will, of course, have our regular live stream tomorrow night at 7 o'clock Eastern time. Patreon members, and I put a link here for those of you who are interested in becoming a member of my Patreon platform. You'll get your stuff, some extra stuff, and Weather in 10. That's a video that I do just for Patreon members. I did one this afternoon talking all about talking about Tropical Storm Dorian and the prospects of that. If you are interested, it's just $2 a month, and you get a whole lot of extra weather. You can message me anytime. And if you're really into weather, I think you will enjoy it. Just ask everybody that's on board here that's part of Patreon, and they'll all tell you that they love it. And I'm really thankful for that. Jaffer Raza, thank you for hitting Super Chat tonight. When is the hurricane going to hit? Okay, Jaffer, where are you? But I would like to know where you are. First of all, not a hurricane right now, a tropical storm, and we'll have to see what happens when we get down the road here for late this week. And if you check out, go back to the beginning of the live stream, if you just joined late, I go into the whole thing about where this is going. And by the way, because of the question earlier, if you do join late, the video is in the live stream becomes part of my video library on YouTube, so you can go ahead and watch it from the very beginning, or watch it later tonight, or watch it first thing tomorrow morning. So it's all up there. Anthony Orr, thanks for reminding me. Let's just really quick, we'll finish it off with this. The National Hurricane Center's got their latest advisory, and on Dorian. Headline: Dorian heading for Puerto Rico, 15.8, 62.7 west on the 8 p.m. Eastern Time advisory on August 27th. Moving west-northwest at 13, lowest pressure 1,005 millibars, and top winds are 50 miles per hour. I just want to see, they've made a few changes here on the watches and warnings. So the government of the Dominican Republic has discontinued the hurricane watch from Isla Sanoa, Saona, okay, Isla Saona to Samana, and discontinued the tropical storm watch from Isla Saona to Punta Palenque. And that's just going by that, I'm thinking that's in the western part of the Dominican Republic. Still in effect, by the way, hurricane watch for Puerto Rico, tropical storm warnings for Puerto Rico, Vieques, Culebra, the U.S. Virgin Islands, the Dominican Republic, from Isla Sanoa to Samana. Tropical storm watch in effect for the Dominican Republic from Samana to Puerto Plata, and that's it. Okay, so a couple of changes there. Otherwise, everything else pretty much remains the same. By the way, before I go really fast, I've thought of one more thing, and that is you can also follow along on the live streams, the videos, and a lot of other weather stuff on my weather app. which is free. And if you are on a Android device, it will default to your location. The iPhone update is still pending. But once that goes through, you no longer will have to put your location in order to get your local weather. It will go there automatically. Plus, you've got the Zoom radar, which is really great. It'll really come in handy this weekend if we start to see this move toward the coastline. I just put the app up. The app is free, and it's available. The link for the app is up there on the chat, and it's available for all mobile devices. Otherwise, you can just search on Google Play Meteorologist Joe Chaffee, or just plain old Joe Chaffee. And on the App Store, I think you have to search Meteorologist Joe Chaffee, and it should come up. Okay, have a great night, everybody. Once again, thank you very much for being here. It's always great to see a nice crowd. We will see you tomorrow.